Find it sleeping in its nest before it wakes up. Touch it gently, you want it feeling completely calm, so you can hold it in your palm and help it grow just like it was born to be. Come.
Welcome to 111 Live. I am Nicola Lewis, this is Gaynor Thompson, and we have Josie Vinten. Gaynor is my mum, so that you know that from the very start. And just to let you know, before we start to give you any information about what this particular episode is about, you can follow us on YouTube. We also are on TikTok. We have a private group on Facebook. We would love you to join. We do also have a website. We will give you all that information when we post this out to you. And I would love to hear from you if you've got any questions, and if you have any connection to the story that we're going to give you today and you wish to get involved or come on and tell us a story that you've had in your life, we would love to hear from you. So before we begin, we want to introduce you to how we work with astrology in our daily life, and Josie is going to give us a little bit of insight about what's happening in the planets today. Before we begin, just so that we can get a sense of the feeling of maybe how we all are as people at the moment experiencing the planets.
Okay, so at the moment, I'll try and keep it a bit general rather than to specifically the day, so it can apply to, say, the week or the month. But I'm looking at the chart right now. It is the 23rd of April, 2023. For reference, we're in the UK. And at the moment, we've got the sun in Taurus at 3 degrees, so it's just gone into Taurus season, conjunct the North Node. So how I see this is that a lot of people at this time are going to be drawn to following their true path and calling in life. And another thing has happened recently, which is quite significant, and that is the solar eclipse, which happened a few days ago, which was in Aries and Libra, about 29 degrees. So if you don't understand any of these words we're saying, ask on the Facebook group and we will elaborate about that. But just to give a summary, so the solar eclipse, it affects us for about 6 months afterwards. And it's a very important time for everyone because it sets off a new cycle. And how I feel with the solar eclipse is that you can't hide from things anymore. So if you feel like things in your life may be a bit disturbed. Oh, yeah. What are you going to say?
No, I'm just agreeing. I feel like it. I feel a bit disturbed.
Exactly. So if you're feeling like your life's been a bit shaken up, you're feeling a bit disturbed, go with it, go with the flow, because it's leading you back to your true purpose and it's clearing out what's no longer needed. It might feel a bit like a disaster at the moment, but it is in Aries, so it's all about new beginnings. This is a fresh start. You can find out some more information about how that affects you personally by looking at how it reacts with your birth chart, seeing what house it sits in, but I won't go into that in too much detail. So another thing that's happened recently is that Pluto has gone into 0 degrees Aquarius. This is a longer effect in transit because Pluto moves so slowly. It takes about 20 plus years to move into a new sign. So this is really showing us a generational shift. We're going more into the new age, and Pluto is the planet of power. So it's moved out of, traditional patriarchy of Capricorn, and we're really going to power of the people. So jobs are relating to anything new age, spiritual, metaphysical is going to be very good to get into. And other than that, I want to say that we're really moving into a digital age, hence why we're doing this online. So it's a good time for all digital pursuits.
Well, I very much enjoyed that because I am Aquarius, and that really does relate to my life right now. And especially when you're talking about, maybe that disruption that you said earlier, I definitely am going through that experience. I'm sure other people are too, but that's definitely happening to me. And it is really about facing things barely. So I really definitely agree with that sense that you've put out today about what's happening on a planetarian level. So moving on, today we are going to be talking about past life, regression, reincarnation. Now, I know that that would prick up quite a few ears and would definitely test some of your psyche. And I would imagine that there are some of you out there that may not believe in it at all. There might be some of you out there that have had an experience. Well, today, Gaynor has had an experience, and this was many moons ago. And this goes right the way back to the age of around 22. And I'm going to hit her off in the moment with her story, which is maybe a very small part of a very big book that is going to be launched very soon. And it leaves you with bated breath and a few cliffhangers. I would imagine that there is someone in the audience that would have had either a deja vu moment. Also, Josie has had a few experiences, which she will finish this off with too, just to give you another insight of somebody else's experience on that. And then I'm just going to hand it over to Gaynor now, because I'm sure that you just want to know exactly how that experience has taken shape. So, Gaynor, we start at the age of 22. Just tell me where you were at 22 and what your spiritual experience was at that time.
I started in a circle at 22, and I would do the meditation, but I would always know that I was somewhere else. I had no idea where I was or what it was about. But as I came back into like consciousness, I'd go, "No, Jonathan, no." And people would say to me, the girls in circle, "Who's Jonathan?" I'd say, "I don't know." I'd say, "But I know that I was somewhere else, and I was dying to tell you, but when I come back, I forgot it all." So it started from there. And then gradually, each circle I went into, and in the 1990s, a friend and I opened a shop in Rochester. And I had a customer come in and ask if we knew anybody that done regression. I said no, but I said I would definitely find it out for you. Anyway, cut a long story short, what happened, I've got a friend who is a medium, a psychic, and she said, "I have a friend that does regression." Absolutely fine. That was lovely. So I said, "I'd like to book up with her." So my friend said, "I'll come with you." So we went, and I had no idea what regression was. I'm going to be honest with you. But when I got there, she was a hypnotist. But I'm thinking, well, hypnotist, oh, well, absolutely great. I'm going to be knocked out and not know nothing. Little did I know that I was hypnotized, but I was still really here. My subconscious and my conscious mind was there, but I was also seeing this other life. Now, the first thing that happened was I thought, they'll never take me down. They'll never put me out. I'll never get any of this, but I did. The first thing I see, I was looking at myself, and I was in this most beautiful dress. It was in ivory, and it had beautiful pearls over it and beautiful pointed shoes. And all I kept saying to her was, "Oh, my dress, oh, my shoes." She's going, "Yes, come on, let's go on from there."
Just explain to them how you see that, though. Although you was telling me that you see the dress, it's how you visually see that. So you was under, but how did that look to you?
This is very hard to explain. I can only say as if I was imagining it, because I must have been, but I was also outside my body, because I could see, I was like looking down at me. I felt I was looking down at me. I'm not too sure.
You said about a camera. You said it looked like a television screen.
Yeah, but it did, but it didn't. It's on the television screen was in my head. So if anybody else has had this experience and they can come up and give me a better answer, great. But I visualized it, but I could actually see myself. How, I can't explain now. But this happened way back in, say, 1990. And I'd opened this shop and what have you. Anyway, so it went on. And the story went on. And who was in the story but Jonathan, who I kept saying in a meditation, "No, Jonathan." He was there. And the Marilyn that hypnotized me said, how old are you? I said, I'm 18. I'm 18 at my birthday party. And I could see this beautiful house. I could see this big tree. And I was waiting for Jonathan to come to see me. And he did. He came in. He looked very, very sheepish. I'm going to give you this first bit because I can't give you all of it because it's in the book. But I'm going to give you the best bits. He came in and he was very handsome. I'd only known him from a child. And he starts to tell me that he was my half brother. And he was not allowed to see me anymore because his father was my father. Right, so that was that bit. So I went into stress. There was a lot more, but it's in the book. Then Marilyn brought me out because I was in such a state, because when I was in that state of consciousness, unconsciousness, I believe I was there. I was that person.
Can I just say, you use stress, but in actual fact, Mum went into shock. Now, I don't remember the story, how clear it is today and how it's been written, but at that time, I knew that my mum had gone through this regression, and she just didn't stop crying. I just thought she was having a breakdown. But it was that traumatizing. I remember her being in the shop. I remember being at home, maybe talking about it to different people. So I was a bit younger at the time.
I was telling my husband, and he couldn't understand why I was in such...
Kept crying.
But anyway, I'll then bring you back, because she brought me out of the hypnosis, sort of calmed me down. She said, you know, will you be all right if I take you back into it? I said, that's fine. She took me back to I was 5 years old. And this is where no Jonathan come in. I can just tell you this bit. I was in front of the house, and Jonathan was my only friend that I ever knew. He was my only friend as a child. And what happened was, I was in this big house. It was like a big mansion house, manor house. It was beautiful. And they was having a party again. And I could see these Scotch guards there, and they're all dressed up beautifully. And I was sitting on the lawn. He was a couple of years older than me. I was about 5. And he was messing about. And he ran to the water. Now, it was a stream, but it was quite a fast stream at that time. He ran to the stream, and I went, no, Jonathan, no. And he went in, and my sister at that time, funny enough, who is my daughter today, and she's a swimmer today. I was no swimmer, and I'm not a swimmer today. She pulled him out. And then the story went on.
So let me just come in there and just give you a bit of insight here. Gaynor was 22, and she first of all had these meditations where she would call out Jonathan's name. Unbeknown to her, that would come up a few years later, or quite a few years later, in the 90s, where she went under regression. For the last 50 years, just to give you an insight on the book, everything that happened in that past life has intertwined like a fabric into this life. And events have happened not just 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. It's gone over a course of time and over a course of synchronicity of events that have actually led her to the Jonathan of today, and also to the place that she lived, and even down to the point of where there was missing pieces on the map, literally physical pieces of buildings and land, when Mum has been able to describe the past history of places. But we're going to leave you on that note, because everything about this story is so in-depth and intricate, and covers, 50 years worth of experiences that have brought her to today to write it. And I hope that you've enjoyed that part of this episode. But also, Josie, as I've said, I am intrigued to hear your experiences of past life, and I'm waiting with bated breath to see it from another person's experience.
Okay, so I think just off the back of Gaynors, I just want to say that was really nice to hear her story, especially because from working with Gaynor, I've heard little bits, but I actually never knew why her book that's coming out was called No Jonathan. So that's definitely clarified, and that was really interesting, and I can't wait to read it when it's out.
It's quite emotional, isn't it, as well? I mean, I feel quite emotional about it.
I know.
No Jonathan, no exclamation mark.
Yeah, it feels emotional. Can feel
I know,
it. Really feel it.
It's very emotional.
And considering that was just a very small part of it, I can't wait to see like the rest of the story and how it all ties in. So stay tuned for that, everyone. So yeah, going on to my own experiences, it wasn't exactly the same as Gaynor's, but to give an overview, obviously I've met a lot of spiritual people, mostly women in my time of sort of Nicola's age. And I've had a few of them tell me that, oh, we had past lives together in Egypt. And that's kind of been a theme. You guys have told me, oh, I see the Egyptian in you. And so off the back of that, I did do maybe like 5 years ago, I done one of those regressions on YouTube. So it's just very like casual. And I did actually go back to a past life in Egypt. Whether it was just my imagination, I don't know. I can't say that for a fact. But what I got from that experience was that I was a man in Egypt and I dedicated my life to work in the pyramids. And that was my whole life. I didn't spend time with my family and I really gave myself over to that. I won't go into too much detail about that because it was just that was a very short experience at that time. But when I go into the astrology later, I'll explain how that is reflected in my birth chart. But the other experience I had, which is like the most pertinent, is that when I was about 18, I was also regressed. It was by a lady in London, but she was using a method that I think was a bit different to the one that Gaynor had. And it was called QHHT, and it was developed by the author Dolores Cannon. So all her books are like the transcripts of her past life regression sessions with people. So if you want to check that out, you can. And I read some of her books and then I found a practitioner that practiced that. And I was just really intrigued to see what would come up. Now, how it worked is this lady said, come with a list of questions that you want to know, and we're going to take you back and see sort of where you end up. Just to like summarize what happened, she put me under. And I was still conscious, like Gaynor said. I could still hear the lady, but I was very much like in my mind visualizing it, like seeing it from a third person's perspective, and being able to like look first person, but a very difficult thing to even explain. But obviously I wasn't quite sure if I was actually just making this up because I have an active imagination. It's very hard to tell what it was. But the life I got regressed to was that it was in, I'd say, Victorian times. I was wearing a big dress and everyone was carrying those little umbrellas that they use to protect themselves from the sun. And I was an older lady at this time in this life, and I lived in this massive house. And basically the whole sort of premise of this life was that I ran a finishing school, and that was my whole life. That was really it. And I'd married someone. I didn't really love them. I had one son, and my whole life was about teaching people how to be prim and proper. And I am very bossy to this day, so I can see it.
All right, I'm really intrigued because sort of like you've gone from Egypt, and now you're in the Victorian times. But when you were talking about the Egyptian story, and lots of people get this when people are expressing to each other, I had the hairs go up on the back of my neck and down my arms. I always love that when someone's telling a real good story, you really sort of like feel that tingle in your body, and that's what I got about that. But I'm just really intrigued that when you were talking about this past life regression, a little bit like my mum, how you get the fact that you had is it one child?
Yeah, one son.
One child. You weren't really that much in love, but your whole life was to do with how you were teaching people to be prim and proper.
Yeah.
But all that context and that depth of that life is like a download, isn't it? It's like it's like sort of like this session and then you come out with all these details. It's fascinating. But going back to you, and you saying about being prim and proper and you're quite bossy, tell me sort of like how that rounded off that story. How did that affect you?
Okay, so yeah, because there is a moral to this story, and there was certain lessons that came out of this. And funnily enough, I've always loved period dramas. I love Downton Abbey. I love the whole Victorian era. And
So I do.
my whole life in that lifetime was geared towards finding people, someone to marry. And the whole moral and the whole values of my life was, oh, you need to act a certain way to be good for a man. And I feel like that sort of has carried over into this lifetime, because if you know me, you've known that sort of my relationships have really been my biggest like turning point, biggest transformation. So yeah, that whole life, I didn't really have a purpose. I didn't really do much. That was my only thing. And I can be in this lifetime as well. I don't like to do a whole lot. But another funny thing in that life, I do remember painting as well. And that was really my only hobby other from the finishing school. But my husband was quite absent. And I just focused my whole life on getting these women ready to be picked by a suitor. That was the whole thing of it. And then the lady who was doing the regression, she took me forward and said, we're going to go forward to when you pass away now. And I was in my bed, and there was just my husband and my one son. So it was quite lonely, but really my whole life had focused on the male gaze. But it's interesting that like the painting was in there, because obviously I am an artist now and I love to paint. But yeah, I think the whole moral of that story and what I've been trying to break away from now is that like you don't need to be a certain way to be in a relationship, and that's not the be all and end all of life. And then yeah, there was another bit of that regression that was different to that, but I don't know if you want to hear that today. But
Absolutely. But before you say any of that, what I find a little bit fascinating is how you're saying how that's transpired over into this life. But my question to you now as an astrologer is, we were going to ask at the end, to be fair, about how that maps into somebody's chart and how that's actually seen. But you expressing that you feel like, you know, you've brought the artist over, but you're also recognizing that you really don't want to be this particular character just to find love. You're speaking about your past life experiences, but you're an astrologer. You're also saying how that's transferred over into your life now, but I really want to know how that looks in a chart, or where would that be?
The point in the chart that points to past lives is always the south node. So you have the south node and the north node, they're always opposite. The north node is where you're going, the south node is where you've come from. So it really shows what skills we've come into with this life, what we're accustomed to, and the north node is really what we're learning to the future. So for example, my south node is in Capricorn. Now, and I'll keep it quite simple for those of you who don't know astrology. So Capricorn is really a sign of wealth and status, profession as well. And it can be quite emotionally cold though, and cutthroat. But yeah, it's very much about the status, you know, where you are in society and climbing the ladder of success. So I think that relates to two of my past life experiences, because when I was in Egypt, my whole life was focused on work, and I didn't have any time for my family, and Capricorn is the sign of work. So I came in with quite a good work ethic to get the job done. However, in my other life, I feel like it relates more to the fact that I was in a very wealthy environment. I had my foundation laid. I had everything I needed, but it was quite emotionally cold, and it was all about status. It was all about reputation. It was all about where you were in society and how much money you had and having a nice husband. So yeah, I'd say, so if you want to know more about your past lives, you can look at your own south node.
That was brilliant. I love all of that information and how that fabrics into your life now, and how it also meets your chart and your astrology, and how everything that you experience, again, a little bit like mum, and how it's sort of like trying to guide you in this life, in, you know, or shape you changing that loveless energy or balancing that work life. I think it's quite amazing. But what I liked about the south node, because I've sort of like had a look at that myself, you know, through the years of having an insight on astrology, how when Mum visited the place that was in her past life regression, the very first time, she was also with somebody that was on her spiritual journey, but somebody had a look into her chart and the lady that she was having the experience with in this life and in her chart. And I'll now hand that over to you to finish that off.
Right. Well, what happened was at that particular time, I was a good friend with Moria, and she's an astrologer. Now, when I came back, I was telling her about what happened. So she said, can you get your friend, one in particular friend, can you get her birth date, time and everything? And apparently, you saying about South Node, I arrived at the house at 2:20, and we was there to 2:50. It was rather 2:20 or 2:50. She checked my chart and her chart, and at exactly the same time, the South Node, she said that we'd been together. She said, and they crossed over, the past life crossed over in that time, as me visiting and her revisiting it.
So finishing off this episode, we hope that you have thoroughly enjoyed the stories that we've fed you so far. I find them quite amazing now. We've got so many more to discuss. We want you to send your questions in. If you want to come on the show, if you have a story that's very, very similar, if you've got something that you want to share with us that's not even around past life, but it is a spiritual story with a moral that has transpired and driven you through your life today, please don't hesitate to subscribe. We want to hear from you. We want you to be engaged, and we want to be sharing everything we can about this particular forum that we're giving you on topics around the spiritual essence of life. I will end on, you know when you know. And sometimes you don't know how you know, but you just know you know. Please stay tuned in. 111 Life.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Catch it, put it in a jar to have and to hold, to save for later. You cannot trust it to come again, to wait for you to find a pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants.